Welcome to the Ohio Family Engagement Leadership Summit. We are glad that you could join us on this day of professional learning meant to take family school community partnership to the next level. My name is Kayan and I will be this session's moderator. This session is session 7, partnering with family to reduce absenteeism, approaches for attendance team. If you have any question, concern, or technical issues, please message me privately in the chat. If you would like contact hours for this session, a code will be provided at the end to enter a request form. Please be on the outlook for this code as it will be only provided once. To ensure that all get to the most of the day, we ask that all participants turn off their webcams and microphones. If you have any questions for presenters, please use the chat features, and I will pass them along at an appropriate time. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Be sure to use hashtag OHSummit24 to share your thoughts. Tom and Max, I'm excited to learn more from you.
Thank you so much for getting us kicked off here today. I am Tom Capretta, and I am really excited to keep the learning going today. I hope that you guys really enjoyed that exciting kickoff from Dr. Katie Novak earlier. But let's get ready and focused for this time together because we got a big group today talking about a pretty important and pressing topic. And so my name's Tom Capretta. I'm a researcher project coordinator here at the Family Engagement Center. I'm going to let my main collaborator in this work and colleague presenting with me today introduce himself. How are you this morning, Max?
Good. Thanks, Tom. Good morning, everyone. My name is Max Zhang, and I am a doctoral student here at The Ohio State University in educational psychology. And I've been working as a graduate research associate at the Statewide Family Engagement Center over the past 2 years. This is one of the projects that Tom and I are really excited about and have been working on for a long time. So just excited to be here and to learn with everyone here today.
Thanks, Max. And so kind of the origin of this work is one of my charges here at the Ohio Statewide Family Engagement Center is kind of diving into and understanding emerging issues as much as I possibly can. And while chronic absenteeism, in my mind, isn't really an emerging issue, I've been studying it for a fairly long time at this point, almost a decade. It has recently not just become the focal point of schools, but has really been covered in national media and local media. There's a lot more kind of interest in it from what we might call like the general public. So we have kind of dug into the literature post-COVID to kind of come up with a framework or some ideas about how we could just enhance the current efforts of schools and other organizations to get kids to school as much as possible. So what we're going to share with you today is a series of strategies and these other series of things called through lines that we hope that you'll really get something out of. And we hope kind of today that you'll hold with you if you're from a school or maybe aware of a school or other organizations kind of strategy about getting kids to school. Hold that in mind. And I want you not just take what we're saying, verbatim, but think about how what we're saying can enhance kind of the efforts you're already doing. Because we know schools and other organizations in Ohio are already sinking a ton of resources and doing great work around attendance every single day. We are not here to suggest that you should do this instead of that. We are here to offer a few new ways of kind of looking at a same old problem. So getting started, we're going to jump right in here today. I hope you see that QR code on the screen. We're going to be using Mentimeter to get ourselves kicked off. That is kind of an online platform to share ideas together. And so what I'd love for you to do here is if you could go ahead and scan that QR code if that is useful for you. And I see some people jumping on there already. And then also, I'm going to drop a link in a chat right now if that's easier for you too. But let's just take a second and go ahead and try to get over to Mentimeter. And we'll give you a couple seconds to do that. Go ahead and let us know in the chat if that is a little tricky for you, and we'll help you out. Great. And I already see people getting started. So while we're making sure that everyone's getting there, just to explain what's happening on the first slide, go ahead and select your responses to that question. You can drag the slider across there. You're allowed to pick as many as you would like. So go ahead and do that as you get over there. I see about 15 people over there. Just drop the link in, so that's easier. Hoping to get at least a critical mass of people over there. Thank you all for jumping right in. I know making a switch between technologies can be tricky, so we appreciate you sticking with us early. Oh. So hopefully you can see this with us now. We got about half of you jumping over there. Continue to let us know in the chat if it's a little tricky to get over there. And I didn't read the prompt to you before, but this prompt says, which of the following are you most worried about when it comes to K-12 education? And we see that there's a pretty wide spread of answers coming in here already. And none of these are right, none of these are wrong, right? These are your personal kind of insights as professionals, as family members, as parents, community leaders. So we'll just take one more second here to kind of see how this shakes out, and then we're going to actually replicate this with a new set of concerns in just a second. So hang on with us. Okie dokie. If you didn't get to do that one, that's okay. We're going to keep on moving. Join us on the next one here. Same activity right here. So go ahead. You can select as many as you'd like. You can move them to whatever degree it's important to you. Hopefully you're seeing or more than five, but a few new kind of concerns there for you to work out. Thank y'all. We'll just give it maybe about 10 more seconds because about 15 more people voted on the last one. Okay, well, as we get those final votes in there, I'm going to kind of tell you what's happening right now. We wanted to jump right in so that you could get thinking about kind of where your mind's at about these important issues and kind of how the things you value or the things you prioritize kind of hang together here. And the reason we asked you this question specifically is I mentioned earlier that this has become a very important topic or interesting topic for the national media to cover. And over the summer, National Public Radio in their print media did a survey of both families with children in school, but also of the general public kind of on issues related to absenteeism. And one of the questions on this survey was exactly what you just went through, kind of what are you most worried about when it comes to education? And I saw that in this example, that chronic absenteeism is kind of a leading concern for people. And I have a couple, hypotheses as to why that is. You know, you did come to a session here on absenteeism, so maybe this is something that's really interesting to you or something important. But also, of course, other things came up here too, such as mental health, making sure that students are prepared for the future, issues related to teachers, whether there's teacher shortages or teacher salaries, things like those issues. So as we see here, there's a lot of things going on and a lot of concerns that people can have. While this group as a whole is most concerned about absenteeism, that's not how the data shakes out all the time. Actually, I did a very similar survey to this on Friday to a group that was half practitioners and half families. And these were not the results. And when NPR did this activity with just families, and I apologize, I know that this is quite small, but you see the highlighted bar down at the bottom, that's chronic absenteeism, way down the list. NPR came up with one idea about this. They said families just don't know enough about chronic absenteeism, and we need to educate them about chronic absenteeism. And if they knew about it, then they know how important it was. Our group thinks that that is kind of true, but also that these represent the real concerns that families have about sending their children to school each day. And without thinking about these concerns holistically and how these different things might hang together and be prioritized for some families over others, that we will never be kind of maximizing our attendance efforts because these other things will always be on family minds. So all that to say, there's an explosion of conversation around absenteeism data. And I think as educators, we should always be critical about it and kind of maybe taking a second glance at the data to see what the conclusions are. Because for me, this is not about educating families, though it is in many ways, but it's actually about being able to talk with them about the things they're most concerned about. All of that's attendance and absenteeism work here. So moving on, just to ground our conversation today with seeing who some of you are out here, we're going to do a quick quiz. So you're still on Mentimeter here, and we'll just take about 10 to 20, 30 seconds to do this. Tell me what you think the definition of chronic absenteeism is. We have three options up there. One is missing 15% of school, one is missing 18% of school, and one is missing 10% of school. So again, we got most of our voters in here, and the majority of the group is correct here. In the state of Ohio, at least specifically, chronic absenteeism is defined by missing 10% of the school year for any reason. That means throughout excused absences, unexcused absences, doesn't matter. They're all the same. 10% of any school missed would be meeting the definition of a student who's chronically absent. There are some other definitions that pop up from time to time, but those definitions are kind of falling out of favor. I think like the federal one used to be 15 days. Some of them were counted by days. Some of them were different percentages, but a lot of groups are honing in around this 10% number. So keep that in mind as something moving forwards. And then here is something I was chatting with you about before. I want you to identify a strategy, if you could, to identify a strategy that you're employing currently to combat chronic absenteeism or to increase attendance here. And this will be important as we go through the presentation today, because again, like I said, we want to be building on what you're already doing, not offering something completely new necessarily. So go ahead and jot these down in here for other people to see, but keep yours with you throughout the presentation. Thanks for sharing. We're implementing attendance teams. We're having more kind of phone calls and visits home and things like that. Progressive communication, coming out proactively there. Things of that nature. Building trust, and we'll talk about trust a lot today. So thanks for sharing that as well. I see in the chat someone shared about incentives, so that's an interesting approach as well, and I think that some of the things we'll talk about today could help shape that too. Scheduling, that's a really good one too. Great job. Tiered supports, we're going to talk about that a little bit today. Oh, 2x10 connections. I'm not super familiar with that. Someone wanted to share in the chat more about that if they thought it was worthwhile. That could be cool. Yeah, dedicating social workers, early warning intervention, and monitoring system. Yes, EWIMS is very important for all students, not just at-risk students. Okay, well, we're not going to go over all these today, and we want to get down to brass tacks and keep things moving. But I want you to go ahead and, you can look through that list if you'd like to, and we're going to again, keep coming back to this. So appreciate you playing along with us today.
All right. So it was great to see everyone's idea, kind of people chiming in these active participation. So we just want to kind of move ahead and talk about the guiding question for today. We, as coming from the Family Engagement Center's perspective and with our years of work, Tom's years of work in school attendance and family engagement, really we're focusing on this question of how can schools improve attendance through specifically family school partnership. And to do that, what we hope is, Tom, if we could move to the next slide. We hope that in about an hour walking out of this meeting, you'll be able to define chronic absenteeism and also explain some research benefits of effective family school partnerships, some of the overall general ones, but also ones that are specifically connected to attendance and chronic absenteeism. And so be able to describe some strategies for engaging families around regular attendance. So how do we capitalize on improved family school partnerships to improve student attendance? And also, like Tom mentioned just now, right, how do we apply these strategies and resources that we talk about here today? We want you to not only to kind of hear about them and think about them in vague terms, we really hope that you would take that with you and think about it in the context of your daily work. We know that a lot of you have already been doing some great effective stuff around improving family engagement or improving attendance. So we want to see whether some of the strategies and resources we share today would kind of contribute to that as well in terms of improving the ongoing work that you've already been doing or that your school has already been doing in terms of improving attendance and battling against chronic absenteeism.
Mute button got me. Here I am. Thanks, Max. And what Max pointed out there, and what we want to make very clear, is that there's a lot of approaches to chronic absenteeism. Many of them overlap. Our main kind of theory of change here is that family partnership is required to maximize any attendance intervention because without family partnership, you're going to be missing critical data about that can misguide our resources and how we are applying interventions. It could mess up the fidelity of that. So partnering with families is really essential to having the maximum outcome from any intervention. And why do we ground our theory of change here in family school partnership? Well, it's because it kind of like works. And there is a lot of evidence to show that almost everyone in a school community kind of benefits just from having effective family school community partnerships. If you look up here, we see that in kind of some of the main categories for teachers, they feel more confident and have better job satisfaction if there's strong family school partnerships. At the same time, students, if this is tied to academics, graduation, attendance, there's some kind of attitudinal kind of correlations or patterns about family school partnership and how students are kind of viewing school, how motivated they are to be there, the feelings they have about it. And then for families feel supported when there's partnership. They feel more confident about supporting their student at home, and they report having better conversations with families. So a couple of things that you see emerging here, and there are going to be themes throughout our presentation, are going to be trust. There's a growing literature about trust and how that is shaped between teachers and families. And research consistently shows that trust between home and school can be maintained and improved through policy and practice. And I make a note of saying that on purpose is because trust seems like kind of this idealistic thing. It seems soft, but there are actually ways to measure trust. There are things that build trust and do not build trust, or build trust and damage trust. And so these types of things, while they do not seem like they're in the direct purview of school, we must be aware that we do have some type of impact on how much trust families have or do not have in the school. We also are talking a lot about partnership, and that is really important for a lot of the reasons that I mentioned up there, but always remembering that students are at the center of our conversations and their families are essential parts of their lives. So we're going to look a little bit at the literature here together and see what we drew out of here. And again, I'm going to keep reminding you to see some of what we talk about, not just as standalone kind of ideas, but how they can inform you or improve the questions you're asking in the meetings and interventions you already have. So, I was supposed to not tell you the answer during the Mentimeter and then have a big reveal here, but I kind of messed that up. So we will just remind you all, 10% is the definition of what chronic absenteeism is. And again, that is any missing of school. It doesn't matter if it's excused or unexcused. And the reason why that is because when we talk about chronic absenteeism, we're not talking about like policy necessarily in terms of like, okay, if a student misses this many days, this thing happens, XYZ, right? Chronic absenteeism's in the center of our world right now because it's a leading indicator that is associated with good things in a positive sense and bad things in a negative sense for students when we're seeing these patterns of attendance. So chronic absenteeism is really for school teams in like kind of data people to be concerned with and working on. What we want to be talking about with families more is just the benefits of coming to school, you know, having great attendance habits, all the great things that students experience when they come to school. Beyond academics too, there's actually recent literature that says that actually harping on the academic success of students and that link to school is kind of exhausting to parents. And parents are much more open to messages about socialization and how they will be developed into like full people and be able to manage their emotions and things like that. So that's actually kind of interesting too. So when we talk about improving attendance, we've come up with like 6 big broad strategies from the literature to combat chronic absenteeism here. So we're going to go through each of these in a little more description and then talk about them a little more when we are done. So yeah, here we go.
All right. So the first strategy that we came up here was focusing on the early years of a student's life, essentially. So when we look into the literature on attendance and on chronic absenteeism, it became quite clear to us that research has shown repeatedly that that students' attendance pattern when they're younger, when they're in their earlier years of schooling, so preschool, kindergarten, early years in elementary school, those patterns, those attendance data, the pattern kind of continues later in their lives as well. They tend to predict their later attendance or later absenteeism in middle school or even high school. And so that led us to say that it's really important, and there could be like 100 different reasons behind why those patterns continue, right? But regardless of what reason that it might be, it's really important to focus on those early years, to think about early childhood education or early childhood programs, but also for middle school or high school in the area, to think about how do we reach those young families or those families with young children when they are even before they actually go to school or when they're still in their very early years of schooling. So we was thinking about ideas like reaching them in a local library, in local clinic, or just places, grocery stores, places that young children would go with their parents or things like that. So that we could reach students even before they actually come to school, right? So that those habits or those earlier patterns could be built or could be influenced in a positive way early on. And then just a little caveat here about focusing on early years. We want to say that to focus on the early years as well, but even as kids go older, when students go to middle school, high school, we also want to think about early in the school years, right? So we want to, for example, for middle school or high school, can we reach students before they start their first day at school? And even for students, who are already in the school, how do we kind of communicate with their parents about importance or try to understand their challenges before a school start, in August or something, so that as they go into their middle school life, high school life, or when they go into a new school year, we have already been addressing some of those challenges or some of those barriers in a preventive way. So we say focus on the early years here, but we're thinking about both kind of focusing on or communicating with families early on in the student's life, but also early on in the school year or in someone's schooling experience, so that we are really not waiting for a problematic attendance pattern to show up and intervene, but also to think about how do we prevent some of these, or how do we build positive attendance habit, a positive attendance pattern early on in students' lives, but also in their, early on in the school year. So, Tom?
Yeah, looking at strategy two, this came up in the keynote a ton. Communication is really at the core of family school partnership. So having really strong communication that is not punitive sounding, that is not legalistic sounding, that invites feedback from families is really important. And I think about this in terms of like, I said earlier, family partnership in absenteeism work is so important because if you do not do that work, you're going to be missing critical data. Well, this is all about expanding trust, which then expands kind of the types of data and the deep information you can have about families, and also the rapport that you can build with them to be able to be more preventative, to see things before they're coming, and get to root causes faster. So in our minds, we consider communication to be effective when it's proactive, understandable, positive, accessible to the family receiving the communication. That means there might be multiple ways that you have to send out communication. A couple other considerations about communication. If you're having an in-person event, we should always be kind of thinking about how we're getting that information to families who could not attend the event. It shouldn't be kind of like if you were here, you got it, and if you weren't, you didn't type of situation. And then also understanding that many states have policies that trigger things like letters home about hours missed or days missed, or contacts with resource officers, truancy officers, or similarly situated people that you could apply a lot of times those letters don't say what the content of the letter has to say. It just says you have to send a letter. So being much more intentional about the way you form those letters, the type of information that's being shared. And we have a resource that can help you rewrite kind of those communications that we'll share in a little bit.
And then with strategy 3, we're thinking about engaging families in equitable and collaborative leadership opportunities at school. And this is really where we kind of take one step forward and say, if the sort of effective communication idea is more about talking to families about their own kids and about their kind of own families' challenges and things like that. Here we are thinking, how can we kind of leverage families' funds of knowledge? This might be something that people talk about a lot. They understand their family's challenges the best, right? They understand maybe a particular area of a neighborhood the best, or a particular challenge that maybe students at a certain age face the most. So to really work with families, to think about different roles that families may play in the school community to benefit the attendance of all students, right? Could they initiate certain programs? Could they provide consultation on other programs? Can they give advice, or can they be evaluators of programs, so that really whatever we do with families to improve attendance, we have input from families in one way or another, and we could get really creative about what to do with specifically with families, or what role we can empower them to play. But really here the idea is to how do we bring families to a position or to support them in playing a bigger role in improving the attendance of their own kids, or maintaining a positive attendance for sure of their own children, but also to think about how do we as a school to use effective school partnership or school family partnership to benefit the attendance of all students.
Yeah, it's a great point, Max. People can lead at home, they can lead in school, they can lead in their communities. So reimagining that's really important. Another thing that is, again, this is not going to shock anyone who's here, but really thinking about it in a nuanced way is about developing intentional collaborative community partnership. And what I mean by this is, or what I want to hone in on here is two words: intentional and collaborative. First of all, community partnerships always been central to this work. It's been central to like a lot of ways we think about progressive schooling recently in the United States. But what comes up many times is schools develop these types of partnerships with stakeholders or other community partners out in there, and it's not necessarily directly one-to-one addressing a need that the school has or an interest that families and students have. It sounded good, and it really probably is good for someone else, but it's not what our families were desiring out of this situation. So when we talk about intentional, we're talking about linking any type of community partnership to a goal that we have for students, and not just like a goal broadly, but also kind of thinking about in terms of what's this organization bring here and what are we contributing to that organization. Because if you're not having a true partnership here, we're really oftentimes going to be talking past each other and things of that nature. But also toning in on collaborative. So how are families and students involved in identifying the types of interests that they have that could require an external community partner, and how are they evaluating those? Okay, so like we brought in a partner and maybe everyone's not feeling it and they were really nice and everything's going great, but it's okay if families are not kind of going to utilize or interested in the type of assets that this partnership is bringing, to kind of reconsider that and reshape that. I also brought up kind of this mutual relationship between the school and the partner, in the sense that without having that type of relationship, it's really hard to build shared kind of vision, shared kind of language about how we're talking about things, shared approach. So all that's really important to try to coordinate across a community. We've seen examples of where the mayor records robocalls in certain communities where that's a cool thing. We've seen in communities where the library is on board with the absenteeism project too. So thinking about who those strategic partners are that can share cohesive messaging in the community will always be essential.
Right, data system. So this wouldn't come as a surprise. Data is important. We rely on data to address chronic absenteeism. But we're really thinking about here, beyond the sort of basic attendance / absenteeism data, what else do we want to talk about, do we want to think about in terms of data? So we focused on two things, right? What data to collect and how to present them. In terms of what to collect, we want to think beyond just the days of missing school and those basic attendance data, but really to think about factors that might be behind those numbers or behind those attendance data. So family engagement data, transportation on the local level, just demographics, and the effectiveness of different attendance programs or school partnership programs in the school. So all of those data could be worthwhile, or it could be helpful in terms of looking for the root causes of chronic absenteeism, or to think about what might be the most effective solutions. But also, along with this what to collect question comes, from whom do we collect these data? So thinking about, we've seen research on school nurses, for example, as a really important source of data when it comes to looking at the root causes behind chronic absenteeism. So to just think about collecting data from a wide range of school staff in terms of what they observe or what they see or the kind of data that they have in their daily work. But to also think about for example, the voices of families and students, and how, the type of things, the feedback that they might have for the effectiveness of a particular program, for example. But then also we want to think about how to present such data and to whom we're presenting them, right? So we want to think about the importance of attendance. So are we presenting the important information, the data, to the families that are in need to know, how my kid's doing, or how this students in the schools doing, and what kind of data might a particular school staff need, or might a student want to see, or might help a student to get a better sense of the importance of coming to school, or things like that. But just be mindful of what data to collect, and knowing that we need to go beyond the basic attendance data, but also to think about the just different ways to present data, and for a wide range of audiences.
Yeah, it's super helpful, Max. If we expect, staff or families to be engaging with this well, we have to present it well, and we have to have data that answers the questions we're asking. And that's also important for this last one, which seems really kind of like, of course, professional learning, but like really, no, you have to do professional learning on any type of intervention that you're seeking to engage. If you expect teachers to be part of your attendance plan or to be part of an attendance intervention, they need to have time to study that, have that information presented to them, and practice ahead of time if it's going to be central to your intervention. Additionally, going back to kind of our first activity with all those reasons why people are thinking what's wrong with the school system, or what are they worried about, those are also underlying causes, right, why people might not be coming to school. So if you're getting your panorama survey back, or your school climate surveys each year back, and you're seeing climate either take a dip or not where you need it to be, how are we supporting the professional learning of teachers, of other support staff in the school, so that they understand how that is linked to chronic absenteeism. And you better believe school climate's linked to chronic absenteeism. There's even evidence that in early childhood programs, students can perceive when they're not having a good time at school. So always thinking about that as well. How are we engaging professionally our staff in schools so that they are prepared to do whatever we ask them to on this important topic? Now, we are already getting deep into things and a little short on time. So, but I do have a question for you all, and I see the chat warming up again here. We just gave you 6 strategies here, the really broad strategies. We've challenged you to think about how they can enhance kind of what you're already doing. I'd really love to see in the chat if you could make a connection kind of between one of those 6 strategies and something you're already doing. If that can, maybe shift questions you're asking or anything like that, let us know in the chat, and we'll come back to some of those there and highlight them. But while you're doing that, we want to talk to you about something that we also think can help shape the questions you're asking when it comes to attendance.
All right, so here we want to talk a little bit about these through lines. And one thing that we want to make clear, and sometimes a little confusing, is sort of the relationship, right, between these through lines and the strategies. So the strategies would be, we would imagine that different schools would have different levels in terms of where they are with those strategies. And one school might be already doing really well on some of them and could improve on the others. But with these through lines, we really encourage all of you to think about these along with each of the strategies, that to kind of to use it as a checklist, or as just something to consider with each of those strategy. So I could give just a really quick example to make this, I guess, more clearly. Let's say we're talking about let's see, the effective communication strategy. So the through lines here. So the number one is diversity and setting. We think about is this a rural school or an urban school or a suburban school, and then how's the demographics of my students, but also the families in this neighborhood or in this area. What are the home languages of students, and what are some just other the characteristics of this particular setting that would matter to how I communicate with families here, or how I communicate with my students here, and what would make it most helpful to build effective communication. So really thinking about specifically my context, my setting, and just all these different things and how that makes my strategy unique. Intervention and prevention, and that's the idea of, do we intervene when the problem when we are already seeing low attendance, or do we also do sort of prevention? So a lot of ideas here. I could think about back to the first strategy, right? Focusing on early years. We can think about, what are the days in a school year we can communicate with families, what type of messages we send out, so that are we, preventing for future absenteeism, or are we kind of intervening with what's already been going on in the school community? And then collaborative approach, I feel like this has been stressed with all of the strategies we talk about. We are always collaborating with our families or with our students, with different school staff, on each of the strategies that we mentioned. So really think about in your school community, in your district, or with the specific students and families and the community, partners that you're working with, how do we make the collaboration most effective and most fruitful in terms of supporting students' attendance? Multi-tier system of supports, we hear this earlier in the poll a little bit. We won't, I don't think we have time to go into super details about this, but thinking about how do we provide universal support for all students in the program, or in the school, and then what are some forms of more kind of intensive or more focused intervention or prevention that would benefit specific groups of students? And and then there's the more individualistic support. Just thinking about all those strategies for all students, and for students that might be particularly in need for one reason or another, so that the strategies are more targeted to students with different needs. And so these through lines, we have an activity following this that would help you probably get a better sense of how these work. But really, we hope that these will serve as like tips or reminders as you consider each of the strategy in your own school setting, so that they really benefit as many students as possible.
Thanks, Max. And if I could, I think like an important delineation there that we're trying to say is like, you might take one of these strategies, right, and look at it really deep, but whether you take one of our strategies or doing your own thing, those through lines are going to be central to anything you're doing to do it well. So being able to consider those questions whenever you're making changes or moves or implementing something new is important. We are going to try to get in for the last little bit of here today out into some breakout groups so you guys can discuss what you've learned today. You can make some application between things and see what you come away with. And hopefully that's something useful. So what we're going to do is I'm going to put us in some breakout groups. Once in the group, whoever ate ice cream last, I'm going to change this direction. Select any strategy. Any of the 6 strategies that you thought was interesting, the ice cream person gets to select it, and you tell the group we're doing this strategy. And then take a couple minutes to go through each of the through lines for that strategy and see kind of how those through lines might affect how you view the strategy, how you implement the strategy, what resources you might need to implement the strategy, and record some thoughts. I made a little note catcher here. Hopefully some of you can access. I dropped it in the chat here, and hopefully that guides you. It's got the 6 strategies, the 4 through lines, and then of course kind of a note catcher for the activity. And The activity kind of goes something like this if you get the note catcher open. Like, let's say I was looking at strategy one. Let's start early. I might say that when I'm considering diversity and setting around strategy one, that if I'm in a rural area, I can basically identify most of the preschool providers if that kids are matriculating from. Yeah, maybe there's kids coming straight from the home, of course, but I can at least make that connection. If you're in Columbus, Ohio, you cannot find every early childhood provider that's going to, send kids to your school. So maybe you might have to think more about a public place like a library or something than trying to partner with every early childhood provider. Intervention, prevention, for starting early, we might think about intervention as pointing resources to students who are coming in late. That's an intervention. We know you registered for school 2 days ago. Maybe you didn't get all the emails ahead of time, so we're going to focus resources there. For prevention, you might do some summer communication. You might have some reach out before people get to school so that they got what they need. Collaborative approach, we might partner with preschool directors or doctors to get that information out there. Multi-tiered approach. We might at tier one give our new students welcome messages from teachers. At tier two, they might get personalized letters with an invitation to follow up. And at tier three, we might do something like a home visit or something. There's not really perfect answers to any of these. They're all bound to your personal context and experience and what you know about your families. But we hope that you find something fruitful discussing them together. So go ahead and open that document if you can. And like I said, you can pick any strategy. The person who ate ice cream last can pick it. And we're going to break out here for a couple minutes to discuss these. Okay, thank you all for coming back. Sorry for the short time. So much to get to, and we could have planned better, so I apologize for that. And I know that I'm the last kind of thing here between you and lunch. That being said, please stick around because if you need those contact hours, you will be getting a code to share. But I wanted to just give a moment right here with our last couple minutes to see if people were uncovering anything in their small groups, or if there's anything they'd like to share about our time together today, or any questions, please raise your hand or we can get with you in the chat here. Yeah, leave it open. Yeah. Yes, Mr. Langford, how are you?
I'm doing extremely well, Tom. In our group, we were in breakout room number 9, and we selected strategy 1 and 6, with more of a focus on 6. Just basically saying that strategy 6 is also inclusive of strategy 1, because if you're providing your staff with the information, the strategy, the tools that they need, that will aid in early childhood education and sharing information with students and families. We also kind of tied it in with the multi-tiered system of support and looking at the tiers, like tier 1, 2, and 3. And so if the state of Ohio is saying 10% or less is basically like a tier 1, and then going up from there, that would really give us some data that we could use to strategically work with students and families that may fall in the different tiers. I'll
Thank you
stop.
for,
I'll
yeah,
stop there if there's anyone else from our group that would like to add.
well, I thank you for sharing, and I think that you guys took on the activity very well and how we wanted to, so we're excited about that. But I also just want to highlight kind of what you're bringing out here, that a lot of these things overlap, a lot of these things are connected, a lot of these things about attendance are tied to other things in the school experience. So what we've tried to offer you here today are just some things that might re-angle your approach or your trajectory, give you new questions to ask about things that you're doing, because we all know the greatest challenge of absenteeism work is that there is no single answer or solution to any of these challenges. And as Dr. Novak presented earlier, we have an ultimate goal, but it requires a lot of flexibility around how we get to that goal. So thinking of that as well here. I wanted to just leave you here with one last thing as we reach the end of our time. We have some resources to share here. Of course, if you're in Ohio, you should be familiar with Ohio's attendance guide from the Department of Education and Workforce that kind of puts forth their priorities, all the policies, that stuff. We have this trust building communication tool that I really like. You can use it for any school home communication, and really it just is a rubric that walks you through whether this is going to be a positive experience for families to receive this letter, or it might sound a little legalistic and punitive. Of course, hopefully all of you know about Attendance Works. If you're in here, Attendance Works has been doing this work for just about as long as everyone else, and they are always creating new resources for both families and schools. So jump on there, check that out. And then also something, if you're getting really serious about upgrading your interventions, there is a lot of information about texting as a strategy to improve attendance. There's a lot more information about other types of communication methods that are continuously emerging that we'd love to connect you with here. I'll go ahead and drop these in the chat if you're sticking around. But in the meantime, I'd love to turn it over to our moderator to give you final directions for the day, because I know lunchtime is upon us. And I also just want to say thanks to my partner, Max, who helped me co-research and co-author all of this work today. So thank you all, and hope lunch is good.